Before we start with this video, which is part of the greater project Pannonia, I want to stop anyone angrily typing in the comments about me not using the word Magyar in the video. This is because even though yes, when they came into Central Europe, they called themselves the Magyar tribes, all their written sources about the Hungarians called them Ungari or Ungari, and it is this Latin name that today's English name of Hungary comes from, and since I'm going to be dealing with only early Hungarian history, it made sense to call the people the name they use in the sources. It also makes it more simple to understand as I won't be switching between two different names. I hope you understand. As I mentioned many times in my other videos on the early Slavic history, the 9th to 10th century Hungarian arrival into Central Europe shifted many power dynamics around the Pannonian plain and pretty much paved the way for the creation of the medieval European borders we are familiar with today. However, at the time, the arrival of nomadic conquering people into the Pannonian plain was just as newsworthy as the Franks fighting another civil war. It was nothing new and nothing unexpected. Many conquering tribes have come to the Pannonian plain before the Hungarians, and many will most likely come after them. But to the surprise of many, this did not happen. Hungarians were the last nomadic tribe to come and settle into the Pannonian basin. But how exactly did the Hungarians come into the Pannonian plain, and what exactly did they do before then, isn't fully known. We have some contemporary writings about them, but these only present a very fragmented timeline that doesn't even mention any events before their arrival into Central Europe. We also have some writings by the Hungarians themselves, but these were mostly written 200 to 300 years later, well after they were settled and Christianized. Nonetheless, combining all these sources together along with archaeology and linguistics can give us a still fragmented but more detailed picture of the early history of the Hungarians. Today it is mostly agreed, although not without its opponents, that the Hungarian language and people came from the larger Ugro-Finnic group, but by this point far removed. Far removed because it is believed that the Hungarians were one of the earliest Ugro-Finnic tribes to venture out of the Ural Mountains into the Eastern European plain around 800 BCE, making them isolated for much of their history and significantly influenced in language and culture by various other people groups they came into contact with. Where exactly the Hungarians were and went during this time, starting in around 800 BCE to 800 CE, is highly debated. But just to give you an idea, one of the theories is as follows. The Hungarians established themselves in the vicinity of the Oka, Don and Volga rivers in around 800 BCE. It was here they came into contact with Iranian groups like Scythians and Sarmatians, and also adopted the nomadic steppe lifestyle. This would also explain the Iranian loanwords in the Hungarian language, and maybe even some borrowed Iranian folk tales. Then, after the Hunnic migration through the area around the 3rd and 4th centuries, we know that the Iranian groups got mostly replaced by Turkic groups in the European steppes, such as the Avars, Sabirs, Khazars, Bulgars, etc. It was here that the Hungarians may have gained some of their Turkic cultural influences and borrowed some of the Turkic words that are in their language. Then, after the fall of the Huns, followed by the subsequent migration of the Avars, Slavs and Bulgars in the 7th century, the Hungarians were forced south into the now Khazar Khanate. Here they had a complicated relationship with the Khazars, probably switching between being independent, allies, vassals, and so on. However, while in contact with the Khazars, the Hungarians borrowed even more Turkic words and assimilated various new people groups into their tribe. Then, due to the push by the Varangians and Slavs from the north, and the Khazars and Pechenegs from the east and south, the Hungarians slowly moved to the area known as Etelkots by the 8th to 9th century. Now, this is only one of many theories to explain what happened to the Hungarian people during 800 BCE to around 800 CE. There's other theories claiming that the Hungarians migrated from the east of the Ural Mountains, not west. There's some claiming that Hungarians first came out of the Ural Mountains south, settling near the Ural River and slowly being pushed west, and even some saying they settled all the way south near the Caucasus, etc. We may probably never know for sure what happened to the Hungarians during this time, but the facts we know for sure are as follows. Hungarians early on diverged from the larger Finno-Ugric group around the Ural Mountains. They adopted the nomadic or semi-nomadic steppe lifestyle and had at some point Iranian, Slavic, but mostly Turkic influences in their language and culture. They were also somehow intertwined at some point with the politics of the Khazar Khanate. Lastly, we know that when they show up in the European written records in 9th century, coming from the area known as Etelkos, today's South Ukraine, they were very much a polyethnic group that wasn't a rigidly defined close-knit ethnic society, but but a group of tribes of varying degrees of ethnic similarity joined together by a common goal and/or alliance and/or leader. This doesn't mean they were all completely different tribes that didn't even speak the same language, it just means that the Hungarians that came into Central Europe weren't a completely homogeneous group of people as used to be believed before. Anything else about the Hungarians outside of what I just listed is very much guesswork at this point. The first certain written record about the Hungarians is from 836 or 37 in the Chronicle by George the Monk. It states that the Hungarian warriors from Etelkos fought alongside the Bulgarian forces against the Byzantines, most likely being paid by the Bulgarians to do so. This plausibly wasn't the first Hungarian involvement in Europe, but it was the first non-disputed recorded one, and it also perfectly sets precedents for the Hungarians as mercenaries and raiders, since that's what they mostly did for the next 100+ years. The first mention of the Hungarians in Western European records comes from Frankish annals, which report a devastating Hungarian raid in East Francia during the winter of 862-63. This raid occurred during the rebellion of Karlman, who, if you remember from my Western Slavic video, was supported by the Moravian king Rastislav. It is believed that the Hungarians came due to Karlman's, but mainly Rastislav's request to help aid in the rebellion. This is further supported by the fact that in a 9th century letter from Salzburg bishopric, we learned that the Hungarians were oftentimes fighting on the side of the Moravians, so Rastislav's enticement of the Hungarians to come help him and Karlman during this time wouldn't be that far-fetched. Huh. Hungarians and Moravians fighting together. Who would have thought? Anyways, the Hungarians came back in 881 again on the side of the Moravians fighting against the Franks. After this event, we don't have any accounts mentioning the Hungarians up until 892. However, it is almost certain that during this time they orchestrated numerous frequent raids into their neighboring realms and ended their long-standing alliance with the Moravians for reasons we don't know. Then in 892 to 894, Hungarians allied themselves with the Franks and helped the Frankish king Arnulf to basically cripple Moravia at the height of its power. This two-sided attack, along with the death of Svetopluk, destroyed any Moravian control in the Pannonian Basin and threw the entire kingdom into disarray, with Svetopluk's sons fighting amongst each other over control. This meant that even though Western Pannonia was taken by the Franks, Eastern Pannonia had a power vacuum. It is plausible that during this time the Hungarians established frontier military outposts in Eastern Pannonia to cement their control in the newly conquered territory, but this is unclear. Nonetheless, in 895, the Hungarians turned their attention to the Bulgars, who arrived at the very gates of Constantinople. The Byzantine Emperor Leo VI asked the Hungarians for help, who took this opportunity and started raiding the Bulgarian kingdom. Due to this, they managed to destroy any kind of remaining Bulgarian control in Transylvania, finally opening up the entire area for a plausible settlement. The Bulgarians had no choice but to retreat from Constantinople and face the Hungarian army head-on. The Hungarians saved Constantinople, and to thank them, Leo VI made a quick peace treaty with the Bulgars and left the Hungarians out to dry. The Hungarians were now stuck in an unfavorable war, and to add to all this, the Bulgars sent envoys to the Pechenegs asking them to destroy the Hungarian homeland while they deal with the main army. It was during this time that some of the Hungarians being attacked by the Pechenegs started to migrate across the Carpathians. The following year, in 896, the Hungarians were defeated by the Bulgars and retreated back home, where they found that all their women and children were either killed or taken away by the Pechenegs. The author of the Annales Fuldenses continues to say that after this, they decided to seek greener pastures as well as women to bear their children west of the Carpathians. More specifically, the lands they have just helped release from the Moravian and Bulgarian control. Whether the Hungarians already controlled the area through aforementioned military outposts since around 892 or just returned to the area with the intention of reconquering it in 895-96 is unknown. Nonetheless, even if that were true, the main Hungarian settlement in Eastern Pannonia and Transylvania still started in around 895 and continued pretty much until 900. In 898, Arnulf, still having his alliance with the Hungarians, used them to raid into the northern Italian lands, as he had lots of trouble subduing that area under his control. However, as the Hungarians returned to Pannonia in 900, they found out that Arnulf died, meaning their alliance relations with the Franks ended. With this news, when they resumed their frequent raids on the neighboring realms, they also ventured into the Frankish kingdom. Due to this, in 901, Franks and Moravians, bitter rivals for almost 100 years, signed a peace treaty and started a defensive cooperation against the Hungarian incursions. The events of the next 5 years are uncertain. We can gather from short mentions in some annals that the Moravian-Frankish alliance managed to defend itself until about 903, but then it seemed like the Hungarians started to gain an upper hand. In the following year, the Hungarians raided again into Italy, this time helping the Italian principalities against the Frankish king, and they also managed to annex at some point the Frankish-controlled western Pannonia. Then in 906, they took control of the remaining Moravian lands, defeated the Bohemians, and raided all the way north into Saxony. They also created many new settlements in these newly conquered territories, moving the center of the Hungarian population more westward. By 907, the Hungarian control stretched from the rivers of Morava and Leitha all the way down to Sava and the Danube. They basically controlled the entire Pannonian plain, but this control was fragile at best. They needed a clear and decisive victory against the Franks to solidify these newly conquered holdings, and so the stage was set for the Battle of Pressburg. However, before continuing, I want to address the fact why I haven't talked much about internal Hungarian affairs during this video. This is because all the contemporary sources that exist from that time don't talk about this. The only two sources that do talk about this are the Gesta Hungarorum and Chronicon Pictum, written in the 13th and 14th century respectively, way after the 9th and 10th centuries conquests of the Hungarians. Plus, a lot of their accounts of early Hungarian history is purely fictional, like Almos, the father of Arpad, being related to Attila the Hun, or the whole story of the Blood Oath. To add to all this, these two sources oftentimes contradict each other, so at best, one of them has to be made up. Due to all this, historians reluctantly use these sources alone when dealing with the early Hungarian history and try to combine them wherever possible with outside writings. Hence, the historical view is mostly lacking in Hungarian internal affairs. With that said, there are things we can tell with pretty good certainty thanks to this approach. For example, we know that the Hungarians had a dual monarchy system, with one ruler being a religious figure and the other a military one. We also know that these rulers during the Hungarian Pannonian conquest were Arpad and Kurzan. However, in 904, when the Hungarians started to gain the upper hand in the Pannonian conquest, the Frankish king Louis III asked Kurzan to come to the Frankish banquet for peace negotiations. Kurzan obliged, but when he showed up, the Franks quickly killed him along with his entourage. The Frankish nobles were hoping this would cause chaos within the Hungarian tribes as their ruler was now dead, but since there was still Arpad, he just assumed both of the king's roles, ending the Hungarian system of dual monarchs. And since Arpad was technically the first king of the Hungarians, he's the one celebrated as the leader who brought his people to Pannonia. The date of Arpad's death, along with who was his successor, is uncertain, but we do know for sure he didn't live past 907, which brings us back to the Battle of Pressburg, today's Bratislava. Even though this battle is one of the most important battles in Hungarian history, it is surrounded with lots of uncertainty. For example, the only complete source we have on the battle comes from a 16th century writer, Johannes Turmayer. He claims to be working from primary Frankish sources that have been since lost to time, but that hasn't stopped some historians doubting his writings. With that said, I'm going to be presenting his version of the battle in this video, but before then, here's the list of all the things we know for sure that happened if Turmayer's entire writings are disregarded. Yeah, that's it. Historians can't even agree on the exact location of the battle if Turmayer is disregarded. With that said, the reason for the Frankish army entering Hungarian lands in 907 was threefold. A. Defeat the Hungarian army so they will stop their raiding expeditions into Francia. B. Reconquer the lost Frankish lands of Pannonia. C. Free Moravia and incorporate it into the Frankish kingdom. Basically, the Franks looked at this expedition as a big Hail Mary to destroy the Hungarians, just as Charlemagne did with the Avars in the 8th and 9th century. At the head of the Frankish army was the Bavarian Duke Luitpold, who continued this idea of walking in the footsteps of Charlemagne by entering the Hungarian territory the same way Charlemagne did. He divided his army into three smaller armies, one marching on the north side of the Danube, of which he took command, the other on the south side of the Danube, and the last one sailing on the Danube, acting as a communication and supply bridge between the two. However, problems started right away as the Hungarians employed a nomadic hit-and-run method, constantly harassing both sides of the Frankish army. This resulted in a large confusion among the divided armies, and due to this confusion, the army on the south bank managed to march way ahead of the two other armies. They decided to stop so the rest of the army could catch up, but that's when the Hungarians attacked in full force, destroying the entire unprepared South Bank army without the rest of the army even knowing about it. When night fell, Luitpold decided to make camp somewhere near Pressburg, or Bratislava, or Pozsony, thinking he will catch up to the South Bank army tomorrow. However, the Hungarians, under the cover of night, crossed the Danube and attacked the unsuspecting Frankish camp, killing most of the soldiers along with Luitpold himself. The next day, the Hungarians destroyed the Danubian fleet by setting it on fire with fire arrows, and so the Battle of Pressburg was over. Hungarians had their decisive victory and solidified their control over the entire Pannonian plain along with all the people living in it. This battle made it clear to everyone that the Hungarians were here to stay, and so the next chapter of the Hungarian history began, the Central European chapter. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you're enjoying Project Pannonia. The video before mine in the collaboration is by Quill and Ink History, talking about the Avars, and the video after mine in the collaboration is by History Time, talking about the Christianization of the now settled Hungarians. If you enjoyed my video, please consider subscribing and stick around for history.